Welcome back to another one of my videos. Now if you like coffee and if you like cake, you should stick around because these cappuccino slices are perfect for you. Now without further ado, let me show you how I made these. Now as per usual, we're going to just start by making the actual cake so we can get that cooled off. Now I was playing around with the idea of doing a different kind of cake than my usual sponge cake, but that would be a little bit more dense and not as fluffy. And when I think about cappuccino slices, I'm thinking fluffy, smooth, creamy coffee. So we are once again making a sponge cake. In this case, you're going to need 3 room temperature eggs, 75 grams of sugar with a pinch of salt, 1 package of vanilla sugar or just vanilla extract, 75 grams of flour, and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And once again, I do have a video on my channel already on the step-by-step how I make my sponge cake, as well as some tips and tricks. So if you want to see it, you can watch it up there. But essentially, all we're doing is whisking up our sugar, salt, vanilla, and our eggs until it's super light and fluffy. So that's going to be about like 15-20 minutes. You also want to make sure that you can't feel any sugar in between your fingers. And in the meantime, we can already sieve together our 2 dry ingredients. Now that our egg mixture is super light and fluffy, we can fold in our dry ingredients. Now I like sieving it over one more time just to make sure it's super light and fluffy and it doesn't weigh down our egg mixture. Now my tin is 8 inches by 8 inches or 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. And I have no idea how this is going to rise because this is the first time I'm making my sponge cake in a square tin. I feel like it might just dome a little bit in the center and the corners might not be quite as tall, but I have no idea, so let's just find out. This is going to go into our oven that's been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit for like 25 minutes. Now while our cake is cooling off, we can get to making our coffee buttercream. Now in this case, I'm using a German buttercream. So for that, you're going to need 1 pudding that you've cooked according to package instructions with 200 milliliters of heavy whipping cream and 300 milliliters of milk. And you want that to be completely cooled off and at room temperature. Then you're also going to need 250 grams of room temperature butter, 1 shot of espresso, and 3 teaspoons-ish of instant coffee. Now, depending on how strong you want your coffee flavor to be in your buttercream, I'd say maybe start with 2 teaspoons of instant espresso powder and then just work up from there. Now, once again, there's already a video on my channel on the step-by-step on how I make my German buttercream. If you want to watch that, it's up there. But essentially, all we are going to do is whisk up our butter until it's super light and fluffy. And in the meantime, we're going to sieve our pudding to make sure that any lumps or clumps that are in there get smoothed out. Now that our butter is super light and fluffy, we can add in little dollops of our pudding one at a time and get that nice and incorporated. Now that we basically have our base buttercream, we can add in our coffee flavor. So I'm going to add part of my espresso to my espresso powder until I get kind of like a paste. Now that our espresso powder is all dissolved, we're just going to pour all of this into our buttercream, and we'll just give this one good mix. Now it's not quite enough coffee flavor for me, so I'm going to add in 1 more teaspoon of instant espresso powder with a splash of our espresso. Once you're happy with your coffee buttercream, you can just set that aside. Now you can also add in a teaspoon of cocoa powder if you want it to be a little bit more mocha-y and chocolatey, but I prefer it just like this, so I'm gonna leave it. Our sponge cake baked absolutely perfectly in this tin, so I'm going to quickly remove it and then cut it into 3 or 4 layers. Now at this point we can also get to layering our cake. So I'm going to be using the same tin that I've just quickly washed to make sure that there's no more crumbs in it, and that's just going to make layering a little bit easier and a little bit more even. So of course you're going to need your sponge cake that's completely cooled off and you've cut into 3 even layers, your coffee buttercream, 1 shot of espresso that you're going to use to drench your cake layers, and I'm also going to be dusting each layer with some cocoa powder. So I'm using about 15 grams of cocoa powder. Now essentially all we're doing is grabbing 1 layer of our sponge cake, drenching it with a layer of our espresso, adding a third of our coffee buttercream, dusting on some cocoa powder, and then repeating that for the other 2 layers. We're going to stick this into the fridge for at least 2 to 3 hours, but honestly I've got stuff to do, so I'm just going to leave it there overnight and we're going to finish these tomorrow. It's the next day and we can finally finish our cappuccino slices. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just gently and carefully remove it from our tin. Now you can cut these into squares or slices, but I think I'm going to cut this into 8 even slices. And I do recommend heating up your knife with some hot water, and that's just going to make cutting a lot smoother. Now you can leave your cappuccino slices just the way they are like this and just enjoy them. But in my case, I thought it'd be a little bit fancier to put a little bit of piping on top. So I whipped up about 200 milliliters of heavy whipping cream just with some sugar and some vanilla. And I have a straight piping tip that's kind of slanted. And we're going to use that to kind of create a wave on top. Now to do that, I'm going to put my thicker part at the bottom and have my thinner part at the top. And I'm just going to gently create like a back and forth motion. Now the cocoa powder doesn't really let the whipped cream stick onto it. So in order to get our design on it, I piped on some strips of our whipped cream, and that kind of acted as a glue for our design to go on top. have it, our delicious cappuccino slices are all done. So that's going to be everything for today's video. If you enjoyed it, you can give it a thumbs up or write me a comment down below. And as always, the whole recipe is going to be in the description box as well.